Not because I suffer fast, not because I pray and fast. No be your show, no be that. I'm watching. Hey, Osinachi, I'm no qua, Osinachi. One man, Osinachi, I'm watching. Hey, Osinachi, Mama, Osinachi. Not because I suffer fast, not because I pray and fast. No be your show, no be that. I'm watching. Hey, Osinachi, I'm no qua, Osinachi. One man, Osinachi, I'm watching. Hey, Osinachi, Mama, Osinachi.
wọ́n kéré o, wọ́n kéré sí nọ́mbà wa. Wọ́n kéré sí nọ́mbà wa, àwọn ọmọdé wọ̀nyí kéré sí nọ́mbà wa.
Wọ́n kéré sí nọ́mbà wa. Wọ́n kéré sí nọ́mbà wa.
Not because I suffer fast, not because I pray and fast. No be your show, no be that. Akwachi, Osinachi, Namnukwa, Osinachi. One man, Osinachi, Akwachi, Osinachi, Mama, Osinachi.
Yeah, we're happy to have you on this panel. I don't know whether our panelists would like to put on their cameras, or maybe because of network, if it's not working too well, then you can, if you are talking and we can't hear you, perhaps you may help us turn off the camera so that we can have a very rich discussion. So, I think my work is just to try and give a brief introduction of the panelists and also what we want to talk about. Then I'll hand over to the chair of the panel to get us started. So I think we'll give him like 15 minutes or 10 minutes to tell us about the core of the theme of Wombiture. Then we'll have our panelists make between 7 and 10 minutes intervention. So it's good to see all of you here. I'm so disappointed that I'm the only person in this room, but it's all well and good. So we have Dr. Yeku there. I know it shuttles between Kansas and Germany these days. We have Dr. Aniga from Ajay Crowther University. We have Dr. Tela from the University of Ibadan. We have Ms. Ukoje from Information Aid Network. And of course, as has been introduced to us, we have Dr. Professor Shola Olonyomi from the University of Ibadan. So the first thing that I will just try to highlight is the fact that what Wombiture tends to portray, just to get us started before I invite him to talk, it's a theoretical exploration of new ways of thinking when it gets to creating narratives, historical narratives, especially when we're talking about biographies and autobiographies. So Wombiture, etymologically is derived from the word womb, and how can we create literature from certain experiences in the womb as it applies to, the human person, documenting their stories through biographies and autobiographies, and it could extend to different aspects. So without further ado, I will invite Professor Olonyomi to get us started, in the discourse. You are muted. Okay.
Thank you so much, Dr. Olayoko, Philip, but we can keep this thing simple. I'm still Shola at least, and I guess you haven't changed from Philip. Now, the theme of today's epistemic narratives through Wombiture in future studies. And just for quick clarification, Dr. Laroko tried to start us off, and beautifully so too, by giving us a background to the which tries to combine the womb and of course culture or other things that are nurtured, culture, literature, agriculture, whatever. It's in that sense of what is nurtured. Now, there is, however, the danger of getting dragged in the literalness of the womb. So we need education here. There are two ways of looking at this concept. One is the literal truth of the implication of a digitally mined or digitally recorded experience in utero stages of life. I mean, there is that literal part, and with all its implications for the way culture will be lived in the digital era. That literal part is exciting and with a lot of potentials, as we can guess, because what that means, therefore, at the level of the just to fast the experience of what used to be a subject, an object, to the potential of a really self-aware conversation of subjectivity that is in that womb. Who is at some and who outside of its own objectified becomes an active subject, and but yet object by the gaze from the outside of the aftermath of being in the womb through the recall texts that we're likely going to be having in the reprographic materials that will exist. Now, this has implication for literature, and as we've hinted in the summary of our present biography and biography, because there's likely going to be access of all of this. But to further expand the concept as a trope beyond the literal reality and its excitement at that level, Wombiture itself is about foundational epistemology, the sense of a rejection of starting the narratives of underserved people, not just the African. It speaks well for the African condition, okay? But it's not just for the African. For the African, yes, it's a rejection of the master texts as it is, because the master text starts immediately. history and with African narratives. It's as much the same as it is for conditions of global universal political economy, the relation between labor and capital. It's much in that same realm of the universal application of becomes a most ready tool.
So yeah.
It would, narratives would never be honest, narratives would never be foundational, narratives would never be foundational. Narratives will have to be epics. Narratives will have to be started in media res. And these are interesting gestures that we think that Wombiture may be able to address. It will have, if you like, certain gentle clashes with even our most exciting moments of the postmodernist experience, because it refuses the canonization of contention, which in itself rejects or does not acknowledge enough of returning to foundational epistemology. It thinks it is partial, and there's a need, for a more comprehensive appreciation of total reality. It rejects a simple binarism of theorizing. It recognizes balance and fused energy as potential exploratory areas. And these are exploratory areas which it's likely going to be taken from the hermeneutics of Ifa. For instance, the whole concept of tibitire, not tibi ati ire, not tibi the good and evil. No, it's good evil, in that sense of clipping, or even almost not clipping, fusion. The containment of the each in the other and the other in the each. That kind of mutuality of binary in sameness and indifference. So these are the kinds of things that we'll be speaking on, and they're real. They're not just theoretical issues. They are things that age-old African epistemologists have discussed. At least we are very familiar that some of the issues we are raising here are in themselves hewn from, the canonical West African Ifa text, popular among that broad group that you call the Kwa, from if not Sierra Leone, at least Ghana, through Togo to Benin, and all of Nigeria in that Kwa group to Igbo land. I am not sure of the Cameroons as such, but it's called Afa among the Igbo. We also recognize such a body of knowledge as an exemplar, for instance, of the kind of examples we are giving, because it is a proto-algorithm in the hermeneutics of its practice. We recognize 3 layers of experiences that future studies is excited about: the probable, the possible, and the preferable. They fall very neatly into the divisional procedure of the Babalawo, which is based on both probabilistic and possibilistic renderings. And there are literature already in this, even though they are not related to futures. But there are people in the sciences, like Tunde Adegbola, the engineer and mathematician and philosopher of Yoruba thoughts. I think he also combines as somebody in artificial intelligence, has worked extensively in this area. Now, we call the trend of ageism in African epistemic traditions to query, because you remember the Ampata Diop's saying that when the old dies in Africa, an entire library burns down. So true for that era, so true for that technology. But what this does mean is there's also the fact of the possibility of the young being able to capture certain aspects of their own individual lives that go far back, just by the capacity of the technology of this era and this moment, And we all hope that studies in this area will call attention to other traditional, forms of anticipating the futures studies, which we find in earlier narratives about certain kinds and characters of birth. Greek narrative reminds us, for instance, of the male womb, particularly when Zeus develops the male womb, which is more like a heuristic reading of envy of the capacity of the reproductive capacity of the woman. We also have that, but we're not counterposing this because of the Greek, that we also have it in Africa. But I just call attention that there are global references to these kinds of experiences. I must learn to keep this short because I'm not supposed to be a contributor. But we're just thinking about this. But I'm glad for one thing. This was a thought that I thought would have been over with in terms of some major book project by now. But you can't run beyond how these things strike and occur to you. I was saying to Dr. Yeku, James Yeku, that there are aspects of Wombiture that I wouldn't have been able to write properly without the benefit of this new work. And so these are the kinds of things. I won't have to wait for all books in life, I know, but I'm really glad that the entire experience of netizenship, also in relation to the creative production in Nigeria on film, and has certain aspects of its own multimodality in society also, helps a great deal to clear the fog. And colleagues also in Ibadan here have been extremely, basically all the people presenting today have bounced off these ideas, and they're taking them to, dimensions that are original and different from what I could ever have conceived of. So in this, all trying to make a sense of what the digital future portends for us. So I guess at the question and answer period, we'll have more to share on this. Let me express on the great work between the US, Nigeria, University of Lagos, and the global audience. It's my privilege, it's our privilege, to be on this platform. Good afternoon from Ibadan. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, sir. I think one very key point that you made during your intervention is the fact that the concept of Wombiture is something that is well suited to the African condition, in that we are trying to create or reevaluate canons, if you could use that word, of writing, the way they are, and perhaps reject them and look for new ways of exploring how technology, intersects with memory, intersects with the human experience. And now we can document this, that different media, which use the word chore to represent agriculture and whatever chores you want to add at the end of the word. So now I would invite Dr. Yeku to help us kickstart the discussion, so that the other panelists can key in. Dr. Yeku, please.
So good afternoon, everyone. It's a great privilege and honor to be with you. I'm sharing just a couple of slides to speak to some of the ideas that I've been, wrestling with since I was invited to join this panel, and I'm so excited to be here. I've been in conversation with Aki and many other people on the panel previously, and basically I draw from the conversation we have had in the past, and of course from discussing with Professor Lauren also. Since we're talking about the futures and everything, my child is coming beside me, so there's a futuristic, performance and going around me. You'll have to forgive that. But to get to the crux of my talk, I just basically thought I would think about my sense of Wombiture, the way I've understood it in the last couple of, months since we began this project, by thinking about my own project on cultural productions and the regimes of visuality that the digital imposes on us. One of the ways I try to think about social media is to think about it as an ontologically visual domain of cultural productions. And I thought I would come to the topic of Wombiture future studies just by reflecting on a tiny aspect of it. And that for me is to think of the visual aesthetics of the Wombitural, if that's possible. So I'm interested in reading prenatal images as forms of mimification. And anybody who is familiar with some of the things I've been working on in recent times knows I've been thinking a lot about the mimification of Nollywood, forms of popular speech on platforms like Instagram, TikTok, and what have you, how people recruit and excavate images from past or old Nollywood, if you like, as forms of speech online. And I've got this meme culture on social media, cultural netizenship, basically to think about the way people integrate visual forms, meme culture as the most immediate and condensed mode of cultural and especially political commentary on social media. The late feminist Lauren Ballant calls this eruption of what she calls silly objects, as a counter politics of the silly object like the selfie, the memes, and what have you. So my interest basically is to think of sonographic images of theta subjects that circulate in this unruly visual field of social media as some kind of silly objects that are used by people to express all kinds of subjectivities. So my focus in this very brief talk is not necessarily to look at the womb literally, and Professor Lauren already cautioned against doing that, but just to think about all kinds of aesthetic possibilities that the womb throws up, right? And for me, just focusing on sonographic images as popular memes on social media is one way to expand the theoretical orbit of Wombiture. And this example, this is somebody basically using an ultrasound image, a sonographic image to express some kind of political commentary, just like you find with the use of other forms of, whether it's not a Nollywood derived meme or a political cartoon. So you have all of these sonographic images on Facebook and many other social media platforms circulating as critiques of dominant cultures, right? Again, decentralizing, if you like to go back to the theme of our panel, certain epistemic narratives. So when the Queen died last year, for example, there were all kinds of narratives online on social media about British colonial policy in Africa, the politics of mourning, who gets to mourn or not. My interest in those kind of discussions would be to focus on commentary practices that invoke sonographic images, the image of the fetal subject in the womb, and how all of those become critiques of dominant cultures, or in some cases just as forms of personal and cultural commentaries, right? There's a woman saying, throw back to when my kid ate whatever I made for dinner without complaining. And what does that mean? How does, what does that mean in terms of the semiotics of this fetal subject, this prenatal subject, whose agency is, heavily dependent on the mother's body, right? But then more importantly is a question I have: what does it mean for the womb to become recruited as an affordance for mimified autobiographical narratives? For me, that's the main, the main question I want to wrestle with in the next couple of weeks on this panel. Hopefully we can have some productive dialogue on this. Unlike the other memes earlier, which are just generally shared sonographic images on culture and politics, the kind of images I'm interested in actually focus on the voice of the fetal subjects as a site of speech, of language, right? And that for me begins to gesture towards the idea of the autobiographical. So in the case of this particular example, the fetal subject is granted the power of language, something you would normally not have in the womb, right? And it's granted the power of language by digital actors that, very importantly, reimagine the womb as a symbolic space of speech, of agency, and creative energy. And I think it's important to stress the idea of the agency of the fetal subject, because to read the womb as a space of autobiographical narration that can be connected to modes of futurity means to grant the fetal subject some kind of agency, which in many cases is actually constrained. And of course, this is true of all forms of agential capacities. Agency is almost always constrained by some kind of structure, some kind of institution. In the case of the fetal subject, any creative capacity in the womb is, of course, mediated, constrained by the environment, the space of the woman, of the mother's womb. So the mother is the first mediatory structure, if you like, for the fetal subject. In the case of the kind of sonographic images I also find online, you find the same similar articulations of agential power being regulated by all kinds of possibilities. It's adult basically casting some kind of gaze back in time to recapture possibilities of certain kinds of narratives in the womb. So unlike the intensely futuristic sensibilities outlined in the Wombiture project so far, what I'm doing with this aspect of of this panel is basically to engage in some kind of reversal of Wombiture's futurism by looking at how adults step back in time to reconfigure the womb as a space of cultural meanings, right? And what that means for the fetal subject as a subject of enunciation, as somebody who has the capacity to produce meaning and language. Hence, for me, and this is probably because of time, and I know there are other speakers, this for me is the crux of it all. The idea that Wombiture therefore can emerge as a site of fictional autobiography that relies on sonographic images on social media. Unlike the highly contestable idea that you can in fact produce certain modes of narration in the womb, I'm more interested in how through sonographic images, you have some kind of fictional autobiography, what some people will call autofiction. And I think that's really significant, especially if you just think about the kind of narratives of the self that derive from that, you know, from that process. The narrative of the self in these images, for example, is offered through images that offers a different, you know, way of thinking about narratology and narratives in general. In this example, and this is the last one I have, there's a self-narration through the power of fictional, you know, language that is given to the fetal subjects. So you have a fetal language that is not necessarily restricted to, you know, the linguistic captions you have around this meme, but also, as a matter of fact, true in the case of video-based memes, gestures and sounds. And of course, if you search on social media, you have people who share of these ultrasound images that initially, of course, are real sonographic images of some real children somewhere, until they become co-opted as forms of popular speech, whether as photo-based memes or video memes. But ultimately, the idea is how there's a self-narration through the power of a fictional fetal language that is articulated through all kinds of, you know, linguistic possibilities at the level of the sonic, the gestural. So there's an ongoing performance of fetal subjectivity and the sonographic images that I find fascinating. And for me, it's what Wombiture affords, you know, affords currently. It's something I think as, you know, I think there's some potential to take this in other, you know, other directions. But basically, what I'm doing is to just come to this topic through through what I've called cultural netizenship, through this focus on cultural productions and popular visual media that circulate on social media. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Yeku, for your wonderful intervention. I think his talk was basically centered on trying to insert Wombiture in the culture of mimification, you know, creation of memes. And he explored both the individual and the communal layers of this mimification in some pre-birth images that, you know, he shared with us. And the point he's trying to make is the fact that narratives are further being decentralized, both in terms of creation and in terms of even dissemination, you know. And so there are multiple ways of even interpreting, you know, the end products of these narratives that are being created via the virtual space as technology affords us. Thank you very much for that wonderful intervention. We'll now invite Dr. Taylor to give us his own version of Wombiture. So I see that actually we have like two other panelists with Professor Lauren Yomi, so we may have to concentrate on that part of the slide to have their own input. Is it ready, or do we move to Dr. Taylor? We're waiting for. We can see you in like 5 places on the screen now. So I'm joking. It's just 3 places. But are you ready for us, or do we go to Miss?
Sorry, he just stepped. I was the one showing him. He stepped out. But let me call him. Or do you want to call Aniga and?
Yeah, I mean, Aniga is not available now, but let's move to Lamin. Yeah, Mr. Koje, can you give us your own presentation? Sorry for being gender insensitive. If you can hear us, we're waiting for you.
This side. Are you hearing me?
Yeah, you can put up your video. You can put up your video if the network is not okay, but we can hear you now.
We can hear you.
Okay. Good evening from this side of the sun. I'm looking at Wombiture from a traditional angle. Yes, Prof said we shouldn't look at it literally, but let's deal with the past before we go. Figurative, and it can be looked at metaphorically. It has narrative features. So I thought that it is charged with meaning since it is figurative. It can mold or remold meaning. And from my understanding of Wombiture is simply the literature of the womb. Literature comes in many forms: spoken, written, hybrid. So I thought, like, since it has it could have figurative meanings, I'll look at literature of the womb in the form of proverbs, in the form of maxims, in the form of folk tales. I'm looking at the womb literally. Literature itself, let's look at the bigger literature, is replete with Wombiture. From the Bible, we had stories of the happenings in the womb, determining the destiny or the names of individuals. When Ichabod's mother named her child, the glory departed. That is a discourse around the opening of the womb. When Jabez, his mother called him Jabez, she is reacting to the discourse around the opening of the womb. When Benjamin was called Benoni, Rachel had labor. And so, because of her experiences, she named her child. And lastly, how about Moses? He was drawn from the water. He was named. I'm looking at the happenings around the womb, pre and post. Post is when the child is out. Pre is while the child is inside. I am looking at after the child has come out. That's why I said these women named their children Ichabod, Jabez, Benoni, Moses. So now let's look at also Proverbs. Africa has proverbs for every area of life. And of course, specifically now, for happenings around the womb. They have proverbs, they have maxims, they have folktales. I will mention some from when I was gathering the proverbs from Yoruba, they explained to me. But in my place, among the Igalas, we have small short stories and proverbs that tell that what are proverbs. Maybe let me start with definition. A proverb is a short saying or piece of folk wisdom that emerges from the general culture rather than being written by a single individual. But the meanings of proverbs most times in a particular culture are not contested. The bigger picture is literature of the womb. The smaller picture is proverbs that have to deal with sayings concerning the womb. It may not be directly. Now, let me give you an example. In the case of two women arguing, please put it at the back of your mind that there is no proverb without context. Every proverb has its context, but then there are general proverbs that are applicable to certain social situations. Now, there's this short story. In my place, it says, Akiti Kata, Ono Mabi. Well, let me explain. It's like when a woman tells the other one, you are not giving birth as you are supposed to. Naturally, they believe that when you are giving birth, give birth and let it go. But then there are situations that will arise and two women are arguing. And of course, it's things that are happening that they use to talk back to each other or insult one another. And proverbs too come. Proverbs are used in meaning. Proverbs are used to explain situations. Proverbs are used to buttress points. And we have proverbs for the womb. Proverbs that have to do with the discourse around the womb in both Igala and in Yoruba. There is a proverb, according to how the woman explained, she said, sorry, I'm coming.
Yeah, if you can help us to round up in 3 minutes.
In 3 minutes, okay.
3.
She was referring to the womb as a precious. Hello?
Yeah, we are hearing you. Right on.
She was referring to the womb. You are distracting me. She's referring to the womb as a precious object that the men are kind of jealous. Explained to me that it's like the way she put it, and maxims that speak to the womb as an organ, that speak to the processes around the child being in the womb, the child coming out, the opening of the womb, and later. So now I'm looking at the implications of Wombiture.
Yeah, we can't hear you very well. It's not very clear. If you can help us wrap up.
Going.
Yeah. Maybe.
And what do they define? They said, according to Daphna and Leah.
Okay, can you send her a message that we can't hear her? So we may have to. Yeah, just so we can't hear. Okay. So, so sorry about that, but I think, yeah, we can't hear you again, Lami. So if you could pardon us, perhaps we'll come back to you during the question and answer session. But I think she's also try. Can you mute the? Yeah. So if you can hear us, we can't hear you any longer. It's not clear. So if you will return back to you during the question and answer session, so that the other panelists will also be able to make, their own interventions. But I think the very important point she was trying to make is to say that the process of Wombiture is not entirely novel in terms of its approach, and it's diverse in terms of the entry point from different disciplines. So she's looking at it from the religious angle, to look at how stories were being created from experiences, in the womb, as reflected in the naming of some key or important figures, in the Bible that went on to, of course, define their person and their mission, within the theological perspective of Wombiture. I think that is also very key to show that it's not restricted to technology. It's not something that is entirely there in the abstract that we cannot relate to within practical experiences, even within certain historical narratives. I know the Bible could be a bit controversial when it comes to history and that, but let's just assume, that certain aspects. I think the point is just that there are practical implications of the theory of Wombiture, as it relates to lived experiences and people's mission, even from the theological perspective. I think now we have to go to Dr. Teller. Dr. Anika is supposed to be next, but we can't see him. But I think we'll go to Dr. Teller to give us his own. Yeah, he's back on his seat. Okay. Yeah, please, you have the floor. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Can you hear me, please?
Yeah, very clearly.
Okay. Thank you very much. So I'll just I have this not entirely.
Now we can't hear. Is that from us? Yes. No, I think it's frozen.
To my presentation, I said the autobiography and the problematics of discourse recontextualization. What I intend to do is to what I've done since I started this particular talk is to look at different narratives of different people, both mothers and people who were once the unborn, about their encounters, about what they felt like, about their recollections of being in the womb generally. So all those narratives, I've checked those narratives. They are secondary, of course, they are secondary texts, you can see, from different sources online. So what I intend to do is to look at their recollections generally and the problems that that it brings up concerning the issue of discourse recontextualization. So as I go ahead, I would have to define what I mean. But what I do in my first slide, which is this, is to look at features and the question of agency. Because I'm going to come to a point where we would have to talk about discourse production and reception. And for us to talk about discourse production and reception, then we assume that both the discourse producer and the discourse receptor have some kind of agency on the other. So there is a way the discourse of Wombiture implicates the discourse of agency at the same time. So what do we find in literature about defining agency? So when these are some of the things we found in literature as certain characteristics of agency or an agent in the first place. It has to be alive, it has to be sentient, which means you have to have the capacity to experience pain or pleasure. It should be a member of the human species, and that's already biologically defined. We can keep debating that. It has to be self-conscious. There must be some sense of personhood there, and the capacity to act or reason must be there. The potential to develop any of these properties which are listed above is also there, and the potential to develop what is called rational agency, the ability to act based on reason, is also there. And then what to call a rational agent may also be vulnerable. So vulnerability does not deny agency in the first place. So these are some considered, if you check the literature, these are some considered features or characteristics of an agent in the first place. Now, the next question I like to ask is about the features. Can we assume that the features have what is called agency in the first place? Or that takes us to the large debates in philosophy and even in law. I'm not a philosopher, I must declare my credentials. I'm just a linguist trying to make an attempt at understanding what philosophers do. Let's think around the philosophy of embodied cognition and what that means in the first place. About whether the features have agency or not, there are already some propounded models in the literature. Okay, there's a container model which says the fetus is merely contained within the maternal body. There's a recognition of its personhood, but it's like it cannot exist outside its mother. It's like a born in the oven or a tenant in its niche, like Smith and Brugger 2003 would say. There's also the bidirectional affective communication model, which is relational in mode, where there's relation between the mother and the fetus. It's considered as a part-whole configuration. Okay, so the maternal body functionally and metabolically would have to integrate the fetus, and there has to be a collaboration between both the pregnancy and the mother, because there's a way the two lives depend on one another. That's what they call the bidirectional affective communication model. And we have that well represented and discussed maybe in Kingma. Then there's a self-individuation model, which means that living beings build themselves out of their material and energetic environment. In that case, we don't see the fetus as essentially a part of the mother. We only see the womb as an environment for the baby to grow. And the baby itself is seen as being able to distinguish itself or himself or herself, as the case may be, from the environment, which is the womb itself. So on the question of whether the fetus has an agency, there is now that's settled. The fetus actually has an agency, but whether it is as something dependent on the mother, whether it's the relational one between the mother and the child, those are different models generally. Now let's come to the meat of the matter, which is about the narratives of the unborn.
Sorry, Dr. Tella. I think you have like 12 slides, and you have like 5 minutes just to caution your
yes,
time.
I will.
Slides. Yeah.
Okay, fine. So narratives of the unborn and abject agency. What I see generally, what I call abject, let me go to the concept of abject agency in the first place. What I call abject agency, by abject agency, I'm trying to characterize the nature of the agency that the unborn has. Okay, the nature of the agency that the unborn has, and the people who give narratives of the unborn, the kind of agency that they have. Babies do not, the unborn does not narrate at the state of the unborn. The narrations come later. So I do not think that because human beings are generally limited by memory and all of that, I do not think that that agency is as syntax as it should be. That's why I talked about the abjection of agency, or the idea of abject agency. And now what I did there was to look at the three branches of it. I talk about abject self-narration. You are narrating your experiences of the womb, some of the things I encountered. You have people who were once the unborn narrating their own experiences in the womb. But then what makes it abject is the fact that there's limited memory. There are values that we have come to acquire that will affect the narration. There are ideologies that we've come to acquire that will affect the narration. And there's the issue of positionality. And then there's the issue of the medium of narration in the first place. Then abject order narration, in this instance, you have the mothers narrating the experiences, things about the unborn. The same set of values, the same set of categories will also affect such narration. Then there's what I call abject order mediated narration. For example, what Professor Yeku presented to us sometimes, which are certain images trying to capture what happened in the womb. It's already mediated. I believe that the medium itself would have had an influence on it. Then there's what is called abject discourse comprehension at the same time. Even when you narrate something about what happened as an unborn to me, how do I get meanings from your narration? So I'm just dealing with the narrative. So that's that about that. Now, how does contextualization come into the matter, or the contextualization come into that? Every time you have the narrative of the unborn, there are moments of recontextualization, because the actual context of what happened is in the womb, and you can look at the time frame and several other factors which will intercede between the point of narration and the point of the actual events or activities being narrated. So I believe that anytime we have the narration of the narratives of the unborn, or the narratives of the unborn, there is, first of all, a kind of recontextualization taking place, in the sense that you are imputing that text from the original context of its production into another context of its production, and that will embody some kind of selective appropriation, relocation, refocusing of the text also through intertextuality, and even interdiscursivity sometimes. So it is that particular fact which Oloroyomi already referred to in his lecture titled "Talking Futures, Literature and Wombiture," when he says, as a trope, Wombiture is charged with the capacity for meaning molding and meaning remolding. As record text, it's implicated on the issues of ideology, power, and hegemony. So I just trying to call our attention to the fact that those kind of narratives are never neutral narratives in the first place. That we should, in treating the narratives of the womb, we have to take into cognizance the fact that what we are dealing with is highly recontextualized, that it has undergone the process of contextualization and recontextualization, And we must account for this. If we must account for the true value of what is being presented. There are different ways things get recontextualized. I've listed some of those things I found in the process of interrogating those things. There are different modes of recontextualization. There are additions, there are substitutions, there are deletions, there are rearrangements of all sorts based on some of those values I mentioned earlier. So I'm just calling attention to the fact that even when Professor Yeku talks about mimification the other time, it is an assertion of the fact that the narrative itself is already recontextualized. And I'm not making at any pretense. Almost every form of discourse is recontextualized in most cases, especially when you have to and we have to account for this when we try to make meanings of those narratives. Of certain detail, possibility of inclusion of certain extraneous materials. Now, what do we do if a text becomes too recontextualized to the point that you cannot be too sure of the originality? One thing we have is that we have the advantage of technology. That's why I said technology to the rescue. Can technology come to the rescue? For example, people do ultra scan of the baby in the womb, but at the so it is still recontextualized in that sense. So what I'm saying in essence is that when we read these narratives, we must not read these narratives as just in a formal sense, as being in a reductive sense in which we delete the values around the narrator and the values that the narrator brings into the narration. We must read it with the consciousness that we are reading certain kind of contextualized and recontextualized text in all instances. And I'm happy that the earlier presentation by Dr. Yeku and by Auntie Lami also reinforced those ideas that those are not neutral labels in the first place. Those are not neutral narratives because I have gone through them. They are narratives that carry the values of the narrator, the ideologies of the narrator, and then the affordances of the medium through which those narrations actually come. So that was what I just wanted to call our attention to, so that we do not get too scientific about the reading of it and see them as neutral texts, but I will read them properly as texts which are imbued by certain ideological configurations. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tella, for your wonderful intervention. I think the key point you're trying to pass across is the process of recontextualization within several media of producing narratives, and that whatever is being produced, as long as it goes through certain media, is also under certain influences within the environment of the media for transmission. I think that calls us to be cautious when we are trying to read not just autobiographies or biographies, but several texts, have undergone different interpretations over time based on the kind of environment within which they are produced. So, and it has to do with the process of even human communication. The way we address each other is based on our own perception of the person or the persons that we are trying to address. And this also influences how we communicate with them and even how they interpret what we are trying to tell them. So I think it's very vital that we explore these intersections of objectivity, of historicity, of what truth is, of what is acceptable as, the intention of the author or the reception of those who are saying what is being passed. Yeah. So thank you very much. I think we'll move on to Dr. Aniga is not with us now. So we'll move on to yeah. So to give us his own submission. Yeah, I think you have less minutes than the former presenter so that we'll be able to have like an engaging interaction. I don't want to give you any time limit, but try to spend less time than the other presenters did.
All right, thank you. I was going to say where this happens to non-doctors. Their time, their times get doctored somewhere. But having said that, okay, please, trying to, okay. Just a couple of seconds or just a minute. Yeah, I think you can go without the.
So you are the one doctoring your time now.
All right. Thank you. Yeah.
Oh,
yes. All right. Thank you very much. So I'd like to begin with a very small joke that came as a meme. Sometimes they go on the social media. And then someone said that, when you're born, you're celebrating your birthday, and then they tell you are 10 years old, 20 years old, forgetting the fact that you actually came 9 months old. That's why is it the case that they begin to count your days from the moment you were born and not from the period of conception. That having spent 9 months in the womb, why shouldn't that count, really? And I think that is one of the central points, in a very literal sense, that Wombiture captures. That human existence, from a very strict sense, beyond the way it is conceptualized from the other, is actually from the moment of conception. I know how this will also be quite implicative for certain discourses. For instance, for the debate on abortion and what have you, where the arguments of at what point does the human person, consciousness as a human person begin. But what I want to speak on is about the navigative agency of the human and social performativity. Because if you look at existence in itself, when we begin to talk about human identity, self-identity, and what have you, this is oftentimes split, between what we may also call the disjunctive character of social performativity, in the sense that when we want to act, we are either acting to propel our own narrative, or we are acting against a prescribed narrative. So that is where it becomes disjunctive, to use the rule of logic of disjunction. But what can we draw from Wombiture? What Wombiture is going to do for us is, first and foremost, it gives us a sense of recalibrating the very notion of personhood. It also gives us another dimension of reimagining the nature of consciousness. Because if we can agree, or if there is a tendency, of going back to the pre-birth period, I didn't say existence now, because pre-birth period is also a form of existence, 9 months, pre-birth. So that point is not often captured when we talk about personhood. When we say, okay, well, who is a human person? We say the human person is a person with consciousness and co. But when we begin to talk about Wombiture in that very massive way, not just in a very reductive way, then we say that we would then need to recalibrate how we consider personhood. And then the argument of consciousness also has to come in. Because if through the aid of technology and code, we are then able to capture different forms of narratives, pre-birth narratives about a person's existence. So at what point then can we sustain, or to what extent can we sustain that argument of consciousness being a predeterminant factor of personhood post-birth alone? Because we are now going back to the pre-birth period as also having this sense of consciousness. And once we have these, then it has its own capacity or probability of rupturing even what we call from ethics to political construction or to any form of social construction. How do I mean? The moment an individual can establish their own existence pre-birth, or can identify narratives of a person's existence pre-birth, then that nullifies to a very large extent certain construction around ethical normativities. When we say, well, a person should act in a particular way that caters to the need of the majority, for instance, to use the theory of utilitarianism, that an action is only morally right if and only if it promotes a greater good for a greater number of persons. I mean, these are constructions post-birth. Would an individual, who has a sense of personhood pre-birth, then be willing to accept this sort of normative construction without some query? That, oh, even before I came into the social space, where you have created these arguments around what social order should inform ethical behaviors, that I was already living independently of this construct. So if an individual had already lived within a particular within the confines of their own ethical construct or non-ethical construct, because a pre-birth period could also be considered as an amoral position with built dispositions towards behavior. So in what way would this then affect what we consider as ethical constructions? And the second one is also about the implications to have, for political constructions, beyond looking at it from the angle of, which I think is a valid one, from the angle of say philosophical anarchism, right? That if I have a consciousness and existence pre-birth, then I should not at any point in time, be constrained by political constructs. Let me make this point clear again. If there is a pre-birth existence of 9 months, which is not necessarily attached to any form of political organization or any form of political construction, then that perhaps may be a way to resolve this crisis of individual autonomy and then the constraints that the state or any other political organization could have. Because if an individual has existed for 9 months without these constraints, then it becomes very problematic if we then begin to use our own construction of a political arrangement as the basis for their action afterwards. And like we said earlier, that it is very possible to have these narratives of pre-birth existence. So if we're able to achieve that, then it gives, it props up all kinds of negations against constructed political, either from political ethical constructions or to any other form of construction within the political space post-birth. What this would then do is that it should nullify any form of political, what I would like to call political pigeonholism. So Wombiture has its own implication for quite an extensive form or quite an extensive area, of human endeavor. Because the moment we are able to establish, or the moment we can really affirm life pre-birth, then how do we sustain all and only narratives of post-birth as the one that should impugn on the life and the narratives of the individual agency of that being that came into this world 9 months old, to go back to the previous meme. And from a very, if you like, say mythical, or to use, or to say from another narrative, I don't know how many people who are you. Ajentala was born on the same day. Ajentala tried to work on the same day, tried to speak on the same day. And it was a Wombiture, at least from the imaginative points of view, as actually embodying that Ajentala possibility. So that this would then clash with what you call post-birth.
Sorry, we can't hear you clearly. If you can put up your video.
So I would like to stop there for now, because
okay, yeah, okay.
This is still this is a study that is not fully is not fully complete yet. Well, that's how the implication that we drawn for any aspect of human endeavor from construction to the political arrangement lines, political anarchism, you know, and individuals saying, well, they don't the state shouldn't have any rights whatsoever, you know, to construct what their living experience ought to be, and then the state parental demand for obligation. Maybe therein lies that of my own position on this for now.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Aleye, for that wonderful intervention. I think you centered your points on the construction or the establishment of personhood, you know, within certain time periods. And you're saying that technology has, or is affording us, you know, the privilege of expanding this affirmation beyond post-birth narratives to pre-birth periods. And this is going to define the moral, the person as a moral subject, you know, even within these different spaces which come, you know, before birth. And you're also trying to also explore political dimensions to this. So we have 20 minutes left. So I think it's, we're supposed to have Dr. Aniga, but he's not here with us. So I know there are some people online. If you could make use of the question and answer tool to drop in your questions. Otherwise, we'll also like to hear from some members of the audience if they have certain comments or contributions or questions to help us explore further this theory of Wombiture that we're, or the concept of Wombiture that we're trying to expand on and try to project as something that fits into the African situation and condition. Okay, yeah. There's a question from, okay, there's a comment or there's a contribution from
just speaking to us.
Yeah.
Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Iwalewa, and I'd just like to say thank you for the great presentation. Like I said, I don't have a question. It's more like a comment, or let's just call it thinking out loud. And I think it just occurred to me, you know, from what Dr. James Yeku said about the womb as space for cultural intersections. And I think it's also something that Dr. Lay also you know, reiterated and on how, you know, and Dr. Teller's presentation on how narrative can be influenced depending on the medium. And I was just wondering, you know, whether one could say that Wombiture intersects with spatial concepts. I mean, when you think of the womb as a physical space within the female body, and it's a locus for creation, growth, and transformation. And I was just thinking, you know, the representation of the womb, it kind of, you know, just evokes spatial metaphors, and it symbolizes different aspects of human existence. I mean, you think of the womb as a sacred space. You think of it as a place of origin, a connection to ancestral roots. And it can, you know, it can also symbolize confinement and limitation. And, you know, when you think of the womb, it's also protective and restrictive. And I was just thinking that, you know, with this intersection of boundaries, transitions, and transformations, there's a fluidity of spatial experiences that is happening within the womb, and especially as the body, you know, undergoes various changes, you know, during pregnancy itself. So I was just thinking of the interplay between the internal and the external words, and how through the exploration of the physical space of the womb, you're not just interacting with boundaries, you're interacting with the external environment of society and culture. And all these intersections can just give way into narratives that can touch upon, you know, identity, gender, power dynamics, and even social constructs. So thank you once again for the great presentation.
Okay, yes. Thank you for smuggling yourself into our panel. We appreciate your wonderful presentation. I don't know if any other person has something, a question, a contribution to make before. Otherwise, I can just throw some questions to the panelists to engage. Is there any? Okay. If I could, and this is not in any particular order, not directed to any person, but I would like us to explore further the context of objectivity, because we've been talking about medium, and this has threaded through the different interventions. So, how can we, do we aspire to getting certain objective narratives when it comes to the understanding of the person? At what point do we set the boundaries, or do we expand the frontiers of objectivity and understanding of the human person within the social environment as technology is affording us within the present context and the present exploration of the concept of Wombiture? So that's my question. I don't know whether Professor Oloyomi would like to start up on that, but I know several of the panelists talked objectivity. Yeah.
No, thanks so much. I suspect that you wanted to just squeeze water out of a stone as a possibility of extending conversation. But the zone of objectivity, not even after, was it between Dr. James or Teller? I don't even know who was raising the question of the mediations and mediations intervals. I mean, the fact of those intervening, features are even there in our realities, makes objectivity in itself a far-fetched possibility. I think we are better at the zone of some broad consensual ethical code of doing things than even our colleagues who do business with the natural sciences are not too confident about talking about simple, straightforward objectivity as it were these days. But on a second note, I just like to plead that let's have broad conversation than anything being directed in this direction, directed at me in that sense. I mean, don't forget that we are coming to the conversation from our different perspectives.
Yeah.
And even if the output of the work I'll be editing, it's the idea isn't about a response to me as such. There is a conceptual category called Wombiture, but without the concept of Wombiture, there's the truth and reality of in utero, recordings in the digital environment. So, and it always will have implication. And so it's any of us running with it. So I mean, let 1,000 flowers bloom. Just go up to. Thank you.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much. I don't know if any other panelists would love to respond to that. Dr. Yeku, for instance, in terms of cultural netizenship, I was at a panel where your panel earlier in the morning, and you were talking about how literature and the media for projecting literature is also changing across time. And I think even within the frame of these discourses, we also need something to operate with, even within, you could say it's consensual, but there needs to be a goal, even if it's not very practical, that we aspire to. So that's the sense in which I'm trying to project the term objectivity, within these discourses, not aspiring to something that is restricted, that is not living, that is cast in stone, but something that could be like a guide for operating, for operationalizing, the term Wombiture and the different entry points in, into the term. Yeah. I see Lamina. Yeah. You have a comment to make?
Oh, me?
Okay, yeah. Okay, definitely you don't have one. Mr. Leye, you wanted to say something?
I'll sign out. Let me mute.
Okay.
Okay, yeah. Okay, so did you want to say something, Mr. Leye, based on what I raised?
Okay. Oh, yes. I could just drop in something. That the question of personhood, for instance, to speak of it from a very objective point of view would be very difficult. It's just like talking about self-identity, because self-identity is technically tied to, the notion of personhood. And I do not think, and this is a very tricky one, I do not think that there is or there could be a very sharp, non-intruding, proposition on what personhood would be in terms of objectivity. To begin with, if there is objective personhood in that very strict, sealed, and delivered sense, then maybe narratives around Wombiture wouldn't even be a possibility in the first instance, because it is the possibility of disrupting, engaging certain narratives around how the person is conceived and what have you, that gave birth to the notion of Wombiture in the first instance. So if it is cast in stone and it cannot be challenged, I do not think Wombiture, we will be discussing Wombiture at this point in time. So the objectivity of defining this concept may be very be problematic, just to put it in a very short and simple term. Thank you. I don't know if Dr. has anything to say on that.
Yeah, I think it could come from, but just to also set the context for the discourse on objectivity, it's within the exploration of mediation of the medium and the kinds of influences they could have, within the creation of narratives and how they are interpreted and understood, So it's not like they are fixed, but it's just like, even within certain developments, how do we try to have something to work with, if I could also escape from the word objectivity? Yeah, Dr. Yeku, you wanted to say something?
I think Dr. Olorijobi wants to respond to that once again.
Okay.
No, it's okay. It's okay. Go on.
No, I wasn't going to respond to anything. I'm just nodding in agreement. But I think the earlier point about objectivity is already, addressed for us by Professor Lauren. I mean, the idea that we can hardly conceive of the objective in this kind of in this kind of mediated environment. Like, it's this idea that agential capabilities are always regulated by institutional and structural, factors, and therefore makes objectivity impossible. There's an aspect of, I think, which we have not really examined here, and that's literature pregnancy, right? People who actually like maybe you keep a pregnancy journal and decide to narrate your experience. You're not just narrating your experience, you're also narrating what your understanding of this particular fetal life growing inside of you is. And to do that necessarily means you are subjective. There's no way you can be objective, right? So the moment you have, agency, constrained or regulated by structure or mediated, like Taylor said, it's almost impossible to have any kind of objective reality, right? The narration that comes from that, that derives from that, is necessarily subjective. But I was more interested in the idea of fetal subjectivity itself rather than objectivity. The idea that this, and I think Leia was getting at this in terms of what's, the coordinates of personhood might help us, to do in regard to this concept itself. The idea that this fetal subject in the womb has certain, positionality that that necessarily invites us and urges us to think about what it means to have some kind of identity, some kind of subjectivity, to be able to be an enunciating subject who produces meanings, right? Who has language. And examples I gave, since you have, adults again, basically looking back to using sonographic images to reconstruct an imaginary, fetal experience. It means again that they are writing subjectivity into those images, right? Especially since you have a situation in which, on the one hand, they recognize that it's possible for this, this fetal subject to talk, to enunciate, but ultimately it's their own narratives they write into whatever, eloquentary space this child or this person has, right? If that makes any sense.
Yeah, I mean, it does indeed. And unfortunately, I'm more confused than even. And I tell you why. I see a bit of objectivity even within the subjective features, and I'm saying that whose narrative represents the truth? Oh, no, let me not. I mean, these are like valued terms I'm trying to avoid, but whose narratives should determine, how we process the reality of the person who is being narrated, if I could use that word. So I'm saying that when you try to create a story from your own subjective point of view, there's a sense in which you're looking for like a communal interpretation of what you're trying to pass across. And I'm not saying common in the sense that it's accepted to every person, but they're like, there are certain expectations when it comes to how you want people to process, what you are saying. And this doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to process it that way, but I'm saying even when we want to interpret these pre-birth images, pre-birth scan, and some things that have been disseminated from different spaces, we could still have a sense of how to operationalize, some of these things. I know it's very complicated, and that's why I threw it out there. I think, Lamin, you wanted to make
before let me come, just 1 second, please. I think what you're getting at, Philip, is a question of evaluation, a question of the paradigms of evaluating and judging what becomes understood as narrative, as fetal narrative. If that's the question you're asking us to think about, I think it's a legitimate question. What fetal narratives would we consider a site of, literature of the womb? It's an important question. I don't have the answers, but I think it's something you're us to think about. So thanks for that.
Yeah, I won't use the word evaluation or judgment, but I think we'll align in that respect. Yeah. Mrs. Ukoje, you wanted to say something? Yeah, I saw you type something here.
Yes, you hearing me?
Yeah, we're hearing you.
The objectivity will be limiting. When narratives are varied, they are subject to several meanings on different layers. And bringing in objectivity or the subject of objectivity will be self-defeating. My third son, my third child, not my second son, my third child, while I was pregnant with him, gave me a lot of problems. But later when he came out, I noticed that what was happening then in the womb was his nature.
Okay, we have 2 minutes, so you have to be a bit brief. Yeah.
When
Another
I lie
panel
down,
is coming in.
it takes extra long time to wake up.
Yeah, but we can't hear you anymore.
But it didn't happen with the other children. Even till now, he exhibits some of them. What do we do? Are you hearing me now?
Yeah,
Hello?
but but
Hello?
we have to move on. Yeah, we have to move on because of time. Dr. Teller, do you have one last word quickly? Okay. Yeah, quickly. Because another panel will have to take this space now.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Well,
Okay, can you?
yeah, we
I
can
assume
hear
you
you.
can.
We can hear you. Yeah. Please go ahead.
So much. Yeah, I just wanted to wade in a bit on this subject of objectivity and like. What I just wanted to say is that I understand where you're going about some kind of definitional characteristics of Wombiture, because if you say it is some kind of literature, then we should be able to have what it means for it to be a kind of literature in the first place. So can you hear me, please?
Yes, we can hear you.
So I understand that quite well, but I just wanted to issue a note, maybe like a note of warning, that in doing that, we should be careful not to fall into the error of trying to define it in relation to existing forms of literature. There'll be general characteristics, but we shouldn't be so glued to the idea of, okay, this is what the literary means. This is how it also has to be. We have to take into cognizance its own peculiarities too, if we have to do that at all in the first place. If you have
Okay,
to
yeah.
characterize first place. So it will be good to have his own peculiar characteristics and not start imposing certain characteristics of extant forms. That was what I just wanted to call attention.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Tella. The cues in the room that you guys subjected me to are that we should leave the platform for other persons. So I'll just appropriate Dr. Olorunmi's turn to thank everyone for participating at this panel, Ms. Ukoje, Dr. Tella, Mr. Leye, Dr. Yeku, Dr. Aniga, and Dr. Professor Olorunmi himself, to thank everyone for participating at this panel, and we hope that these discussions will help us to reflect more on this very wonderful thing. Thank you very much, everyone.